I've sat across from more than 2,000 people in my career. 2,000 men and women who came to me, some desperate, some confident, some somewhere in the painful middle, wanting to know one thing: is my retirement going to be okay? I'm Dr. Richard Ashford. I'm 70 years old. I spent 35 years as a retirement planning economist. I hold degrees from Georgetown and the University of Chicago. I publish papers on pension sustainability that are still cited today. I lectured to auditoriums full of financial professionals who themselves had clients depending on them. And unlike a lot of the people who stand at those podiums and talk about retirement security, I followed my own advice. I built my own portfolio with discipline for 4 decades. I retired at 65 with genuine financial security. My retirement works. My health is managed. My money is structured. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. For every client I help build a solid retirement, I watch 3 others walk out of my office, ignore what I told them, and destroy everything they'd spent decades building. And in 35 years of watching that happen, I kept a notebook. Every client who lost their retirement, every face I couldn't stop thinking about, I wrote down what went wrong. After 20 years of entries, the notebook told me something I was not expecting. It wasn't market crashes that destroyed most of these retirements. It wasn't divorce. It wasn't even healthcare costs, though Lord knows those are brutal enough. It wasn't inflation. It wasn't poor fund selection or bad Social Security timing. It was one mistake, one decision, made after 65. The same mistake, over and over. In 1,400 out of the 2,000 cases I tracked closely enough to know the full truth. Today I'm going to tell you what that mistake is. I'm going to tell you about a man I'll call Frank, and I'm going to give you the exact framework I use to protect my own retirement, so you don't become the next entry in my notebook. Stay with me. This conversation may be the most important one you have all year. I've been doing this work since 1979. I started as an economist analyzing pension fund sustainability for state governments, watching systems that looked ironclad on paper collapse under demographic pressure. That work shaped everything I came to understand about retirement risk. By the late 80s, I was advising private clients, and I noticed something the academic literature wasn't naming clearly enough. The clients who lost their retirements truly lost them, not just took a hit and recovered, almost never lost them during accumulation. They didn't lose their 401ks because they picked bad funds at 42. They didn't fail because of anything that happened before they retired. They failed in the first 5 years after they did. That window, age 65 to 70, is what I started calling the danger zone. And the more I studied it, the more I realized it wasn't random. There was a pattern, the same emotional trigger, the same category of financial decision, the same catastrophic mathematical outcome. Here's what I kept seeing. A person retires. They've done everything right. They've got $400,000, maybe $500,000 in their 401k and IRA. They've got Social Security lined up. They've got Medicare. They feel, for the first time in 30 years, genuinely secure. The finish line is behind them. They made it. And then life doesn't stop. A son needs $150,000 to save his struggling business. A daughter is going through a brutal divorce and needs a down payment. A brother-in-law has an investment deal, real estate or a franchise or a startup, and it's a sure thing, something that cannot wait. And the retiree, the one who saved for 30 years, who did everything right, makes a withdrawal. Not a small one, a large one, a life-changing one they believe is temporary, one they are certain they'll recover from. They won't. And I can tell you exactly why, with numbers, because this is not sentiment, this is mathematics. When you retire, you shift from building your portfolio to drawing it down. During accumulation, time and compound growth are your allies. During distribution, sequence of returns becomes your greatest threat. If your portfolio takes a significant hit in year 1, 2 or 3 of retirement, whether from a market crash or from a large voluntary withdrawal, you cannot recover the way you could at 45. The math is unforgiving. A 66-year-old who withdraws $150,000 from a $400,000 portfolio doesn't just lose that money. They lose every dollar of growth that money would have generated for the next 20 years. And they lose it at precisely the moment when they have no more working years to replace it. I explained this to Frank in 2004. He nodded. He said he understood. He didn't. Not really. Not until it was too late. Frank walks into my office in the fall of 2004. He's 61. He's been a mid-level operations manager at a manufacturing plant in Columbus, Ohio for 32 years. He's accumulated $480,000 in his 401k, has a modest pension, and Social Security waiting at 66. He's not wealthy, but by any reasonable measure, Frank has done it. He's smiling when he sits down. I've seen that smile hundreds of times. It's the smile of a man who thinks the hard part is over. We spend nearly 2 hours going through his plan. I run the projections under 3 scenarios: optimistic, conservative, and stress-tested. Under all 3, if Frank retires at 65, delays Social Security as planned, and avoids any large, unplanned withdrawals, he's fine. His portfolio can sustain his lifestyle well into his mid-80s. I told him, and I remember this exactly because I've replayed it many times since, Frank, the only way this plan falls apart is if something takes a large bite out of this portfolio in the first 5 years. Guard those years like they're sacred, because mathematically, they are. He said, I understand, Richard. I've worked too hard to blow it now. He retired at 63. His company offered an early retirement package he couldn't refuse. The plan adjusted, tighter but still workable. Then 2007 arrived. Frank's son Kevin had been running a small residential construction company for 6 years. Kevin was a hard worker, stubborn like his father, which in good times is a virtue, and in bad times is a trap. By early 2007, the housing market was beginning to show cracks that I could see clearly and that Kevin could not. His business was over-leveraged. He had 2 projects that weren't moving. He needed $150,000 to restructure his debts and stay alive through what he believed would be a short correction. Kevin told Frank it was temporary. He'd have it back within 18 months. Frank called me. I could hear it in his voice before he said a word. He'd already made up his mind and was calling me for permission, not advice. I told him not to do it. I said, Frank, I understand this is your son, but I need you to hear me. This is not a financial decision. This is an emotional decision dressed in financial clothing. Kevin's business is in a sector that is about to experience a correction unlike anything we've seen since the Great Depression. I say that carefully. A withdrawal of $150 from your portfolio right now means you'll need to pull closer to $220 to net that after federal and state taxes. You will be selling into a market that is near its peak. You will permanently sacrifice that capital and every dollar of growth it would have generated. And if Kevin's business fails anyway, which I believe it will, you will have no mechanism to recover this loss. Not at 64. Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, He's my son, Richard. I know. I understand that. I'm a father myself, and I knew what it cost him to be in that position. But I also knew what the math was about to do to him. He withdrew the money in December of 2007. He pulled $222,000 from his 401k to net the $150 Kevin needed after taxes. He handed his son a check in time for Christmas. By March of 2008, Kevin's construction company was closed. The subprime collapse hit like a wall of water. The money was gone, absorbed by debts on projects that would never be completed. By October of 2008, the stock market had fallen 40% from its peak. Frank's remaining portfolio, already reduced by $222,000, dropped another third. Frank called me from his car, parked in a lot outside a Denny's in Columbus. I can still hear the flatness in his voice, like a man who had been awake for 3 days and finally stopped expecting the nightmare to end. "You were right," he said. "I just didn't think it would happen that fast." I didn't say anything for a moment. There was nothing useful to say. That's the part of this work that doesn't get easier. 35 years in, and it still doesn't get easier. The thing I need you to understand about Frank, and this is crucial, is that he was not a foolish man. Frank was disciplined. Frank saved aggressively for 32 years. He read the materials I gave him. He asked good questions in every meeting. He understood, in the abstract, that large withdrawals were dangerous in early retirement. But he was 64 years old, and his son was going under, and the emotional reality of that moment, a father watching his child fail, overwhelmed 32 years of financial discipline in a single afternoon phone call. That is the mechanism. That is the hidden engine of this mistake, and the reason it repeats so relentlessly across so many different people, income levels, and backgrounds. It is not stupidity. It is not greed. It is love. It is loyalty. It is the deeply human conviction that the money you saved for your own survival is a resource you should be able to deploy for the people you care about. And in some circumstances, some amounts, it is. I am not saying never help your family. I am saying the timing matters more than you can feel when you are in the emotional storm of the moment. After Frank's call, I went back to my notebook. I pulled every retirement failure I'd documented over 20 years. And the pattern was so stark I felt something cold move through me. 73% of the retirement failures in my records, failures not caused by catastrophic health events, involved one large financial decision made within the first 5 years of retirement. Not a series of bad decisions, not a lifetime of poor planning. One decision. The median withdrawal, $142,000. The median age, 67. And the result, without exception, was a retiree who had been structurally sound, who had done everything right up to that moment, facing a future of diminished income, chronic financial anxiety, and in many cases, a return to work in their late 60s or 70s. Frank went back to work at 68, part-time, at a home improvement store in Columbus. He stood on his feet for 6 hours at a stretch. He wasn't resentful about it. That's not who Frank was. But it wasn't the retirement he'd earned. So here is what I want you to build before that moment arrives for you. Because it will arrive. In some form, it will arrive. The clients who protected their retirements, the ones who never ended up in my notebook, had one thing in common that had nothing to do with willpower or love for their families. They had structures, systems, architecture that created friction between the emotional moment and the financial decision. And that friction, that deliberate pause, saved them. I call it the 4-layer defense. Layer 1 is the lockbox rule. Your 401k and IRA must not feel immediately accessible in an emotional moment. Work with your advisor to require a formal written request or waiting period before any withdrawal above $25,000 can be processed. Make it bureaucratic, deliberately. Bureaucracy that feels annoying in normal times is a lifesaver in a crisis. Layer 2 is the 72-hour rule. For any withdrawal above $25,000, institute a mandatory 72-hour waiting period. Research on financial decision-making under emotional stress is unambiguous. The urgency almost always diminishes when given time. If the need is still real after 72 hours, you make that decision with far more clarity and far less regret. Layer 3 is the RMD buffer strategy. Starting at 73, your required minimum distributions combined with Social Security should cover your core living expenses. That baseline income is your foundation. Everything above it is your buffer. And that buffer, not your principal, is what exists for family emergencies and support. If the buffer is exhausted and the need is genuine, then and only then do you have a deliberate conversation about principle. Layer 4 is the family conversation. Before the moment of crisis arrives, sit down with your adult children and be honest about your retirement structure. Tell them what you have. Tell them, with love and clarity, that your retirement accounts are not a family emergency fund. Not because you don't love them, but because a parent who depletes their retirement at 67 becomes financially dependent on those same children at 78. Frank never had that conversation with Kevin. Kevin didn't know the real structure of his father's retirement. He only knew his father had money that might save him. If Frank had said clearly, a year earlier, "Kevin, my retirement cannot be touched. Here's why. Here's the math," the outcome might have been different. Maybe not. But the architecture would have been in place. I'm still doing this work at 70 because of Frank. Because of the 1,400 faces in my notebook. Because every time I watch someone's eyes change during a conversation like this one, the moment they realize they were 6 months away from making the same decision, I feel like I've given back something I owe. I followed my own rules. I retired at 65 with security and peace of mind. I am sitting here today, comfortable, grateful, watching my grandchildren grow up without financial panic in my chest. Frank didn't get that. And neither will you if you wait until the moment of crisis to build the structure that should already be in place. Build it now. Build it today. Guard those first 5 years like they're sacred, because they are.